I never thought the day would come when my entire life would be shattered in a single evening. For 25 years, I had been the wife of a man who the world admired, envied, and feared. My husband was not just rich, he was a billionaire, a man who turned every opportunity into gold, a man who could buy anything he wanted. Yet on that night, he bought himself freedom from me. We were sitting at the long oak dining table in our mansion, the one he had imported piece by piece from Italy. The chandeliers above us glowed softly, and the servants had just left after serving dinner. I had cooked for years when we were young and struggling, but now we lived in a world where I was not expected to lift a finger. Still, I always made sure the house carried my touch. It was my pride, my sanctuary, or so I thought. He sat across from me, his fork clinking against the plate as if nothing was wrong. His face was unreadable, the same calm mask he wore during business deals worth billions. But I had been married to him long enough to notice the tension in his jaw, the way his hands moved too quickly, and the way he avoided my eyes. Finally, he set down his fork, leaned back in his chair, and spoke words that split my world apart. "I'm leaving you." At first, I laughed. It sounded absurd. Leaving me, after everything we had built together, after the children we raised, after the years of sacrifice. But the coldness in his eyes told me this was no joke. "You cannot be serious," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What do you mean you are leaving me?" He exhaled as if I were a burden he had carried too long. "I want a divorce. I have met someone else. She is younger. She understands me in a way you no longer do." The words pierced me like knives. My breath caught in my throat. My chest tightened until I felt as if I could not breathe. "Younger," I repeated, my voice breaking. "After everything, after 25 years, you are leaving me for someone younger." He did not flinch. He did not soften. He simply stared at me, as if I were nothing more than an employee being dismissed from service. "I am not happy anymore," he said flatly. "I deserve happiness. You have had your time with me, and now it is over." I slammed my hand on the table. The crystal glass beside me toppled, shattering across the marble floor. "Over after I gave you my youth, my dreams, my life, after I stood beside you when you had nothing, after I carried this family while you built your empire, you stand here and tell me it is over." His silence was more painful than his words. He had already made his decision. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Who is she?" I demanded. "Who is this woman who thinks she can replace me?" He finally looked me in the eyes, and there was no shame, no regret. "Her name does not matter. What matters is that I am moving on. The papers are already prepared. I want you to sign them quietly. I will give you a settlement, more than enough for you to live comfortably." Comfortably. That word stabbed deeper than any knife. Comfortably, as if I were some stranger he had to pay off. As if 25 years of loyalty, of partnership, of love could be reduced to a financial transaction. I rose from my chair, my body shaking with rage. "You arrogant man. You think money can replace loyalty. You think signing a check will erase the betrayal you have inflicted on me. I do not want your settlement. I do not want your pity. You are throwing away everything for a fantasy, for a girl who only sees the number of zeros in your bank account." He stood too, towering over me, but I did not back down. My voice grew stronger even as my heart bled. "One day, she will betray you. One day, you will know what it feels like to be discarded like trash. And when that day comes, remember this moment." He smirked, a cruel smile that mocked my pain. "You will not survive without me. You have lived in my shadow for too long. You have no idea how to stand on your own. When I walk away, you will crumble." With that, he left the room, leaving me standing among the broken glass, my hands trembling, my heart shattering into pieces I feared I could never put back together. I collapsed into the chair, my body heavy with grief, my mind swirled with memories of our youth, of the small apartment where we once dreamed of a better future, of the nights I stayed awake comforting him when his first ventures failed, of the moments I believed in him when no one else did. And now, after all of it, he had thrown me away for someone younger. The mansion felt hollow that night. Every wall, every painting, every piece of furniture seemed to mock me. The silence pressed down on me until I could hardly breathe. I wanted to scream, to tear the chandeliers from the ceiling, to burn the house to the ground. But I sat in silence, my tears falling silently into my lap. I thought of calling my children, but how could I? How could I tell them that their father had chosen a stranger over their mother? How could I let them see me so broken? No, I would not let him destroy me completely. As the night dragged on, I found myself wandering into his study. The shelves, lined with leather-bound books, the mahogany desk polished to perfection, the safe hidden behind a painting. I stared at the safe for a long time, my mind whispering dark thoughts. He thought I had nothing. He thought I was weak, helpless, and dependent. But he had forgotten who I truly was. I had built my strength quietly, in shadows where he never looked, only he basked in his glory. I had built something of my own, a fortune hidden away where no one could touch it. I wiped my tears and stood taller. If he wanted freedom, he would have it. If he wanted to believe I was powerless, let him. For now, I would let him walk away, smug in his arrogance. But one day, when the ground beneath him crumbled, he would remember me. And when that day came, he would beg. He just did not know it yet. The morning after he left me felt like waking into a nightmare that refused to end. The bed was cold beside me, a hollow reminder that the man I had shared my life with for decades had chosen someone else. I sat up slowly, my head pounding from a night of restless tears. The sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, but instead of warming me, it made me feel exposed, vulnerable, and stripped of everything I thought was permanent. I walked through the mansion in silence. Every corner carried his shadow. The smell of his cologne lingered in the hallway. His cufflinks sat on the dresser, and the faint trace of his voice echoed in the study. But he was gone, and with him, the illusion of security I had built around myself. My phone buzzed constantly. Friends, acquaintances, and even journalists had heard the whispers already. They wanted comments, gossip, or just the satisfaction of seeing the mighty fall. I refused to answer. How could I explain to anyone what it felt like to be discarded? Like yesterday's news, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. Puffy eyes, pale skin, lips trembling. I hardly recognized the woman looking back. "You are not broken," I whispered to myself, though my voice shook. "You will not let him destroy you." But deep inside, I felt shattered. I tried to eat breakfast, but every bite turned to ash in my mouth. I tried to focus on the day's routine, but everything felt meaningless. The staff tiptoed around me, their sympathetic glances cutting into my pride. I hated their pity. I hated being seen as weak. By noon, I decided to leave the house. I could not suffocate inside those walls any longer. I wrapped a scarf around my head, slipped on sunglasses, and drove away from the mansion. I did not know where I was going, only that I needed to escape the ghost of his betrayal. The city felt different that day. The billboards, the busy streets, the expensive stores all mocked me. I was once the woman who walked these streets with confidence, arm in arm with the man the world admired. Now I was invisible, a discarded wife. I ended up in front of the small cafe we used to visit years ago when we were still young and dreaming. The smell of coffee drifted through the air as I sat down in the corner. Couples laughed, friends chatted. Life moved on, as if my world had not collapsed. I pulled out my phone and stared at his name. My fingers hovered over the screen, tempted to call and demand answers. But what would I say? That I still loved him, that I still wanted him back? No, I would not give him that satisfaction. Instead, I opened a locked folder on my phone. Inside were files, documents, and numbers only I knew about. This was my secret world, the one I had built quietly over the years, while he believed I lived only in his shadow, while he traveled the world and expanded his empire. I had invested in my own ventures, small businesses at first, then properties, then international stocks. I had learned to be careful, discreet, invisible. He thought he was the only one with power, but he was wrong. I remembered the words he had thrown at me the night before. "You will not survive without me." The bitterness of it fueled me now. He thought I had no strength of my own, no identity outside of him. Let him believe that. His arrogance was my shield. I sipped my coffee slowly, my mind clearing. I made a decision that day. I would not chase him. I would not beg. I would not humiliate myself by fighting for his scraps. Instead, I would rise in silence, building strength until the day came when he would face the truth. When I returned home, later, the mansion no longer felt like a prison. It was still painful, but now I saw it differently. Every room reminded me of his betrayal, yes, but it also reminded me of the years I had sacrificed. Those sacrifices had shaped me into someone stronger than he realized. The staff greeted me with nervous smiles, but I walked with my head high. "Prepare dinner," I instructed firmly. "Set the table for one." That night, I dined alone at the long oak table where he had shattered me the night before. The silence was heavy, but I forced myself to sit tall. I was not eating as his abandoned wife. I was eating as a woman who refused to be erased. As the days passed, whispers grew louder. Friends reached out with feigned concern. Gossip magazines ran stories about his new relationship, and photographs of him with the younger woman filled the internet. Their smiles looked forced to me, though the world saw glamour. I ignored the noise. I spent my mornings in the study, organizing my files, expanding my hidden fortune. I spent my afternoons walking through the city, observing, planning, and reminding myself that I was not a victim. But nights were harder. Alone, in bed, I replayed his words, his cruelty, the way he dismissed me like a stranger, anger mixed with sorrow until I could hardly sleep. I reminded myself over and over that this pain was temporary, that I would turn it into strength. One evening, I visited the old neighborhood where we had started our life together. The small apartment was still there, worn and faded, a reminder of humble beginnings. I stood outside, remembering how I once believed in his dreams more than my own. I had been the foundation upon which he built his empire. Yet he had abandoned me without hesitation. As I stood there, I made a vow. I would never again let my worth be defined by him or anyone else. I would build my own legacy, one so powerful that when he came crawling back, the world would know who truly held the power. On my way home, I stopped by a jewelry store. The clerk showed me a dazzling diamond necklace, the kind my husband used to gift me after sealing a major deal. But this time, I bought it for myself. It was not about the diamonds. It was about reclaiming control. When I put the necklace around my neck that night, I looked in the mirror and smiled faintly. For the first time since he left, I felt alive. The days turned into weeks. I grew stronger, sharper, and more determined. I did not cry anymore. I did not wallow in self-pity. Instead, I prepared silently. I networked with people he did not know. I attended events not as his wife, but as a woman with her own presence. I was building a world he could not touch. And while I rebuilt myself, piece by piece, news began to spread. Whispers of trouble in his business, rumors of his younger woman spending recklessly, photographs of him looking more tired, less invincible. I listened to it all with quiet satisfaction. One evening, as I closed my laptop after securing a new investment, I stood at the window overlooking the city lights. My reflection in the glass was no longer the broken woman who had been discarded. It was a woman waiting patiently for the storm to turn in her favor. He thought he had left me powerless. He thought he had destroyed me. But in truth, he had awakened a force he could never control. And soon, very soon, the world would see who truly held the fortune. The world wasted no time in parading his new life in front of me. Everywhere I turned, his face appeared on television, in magazines, across the glossy screens of gossip websites. He was smiling, laughing, and glowing beside the woman who had replaced me. The headlines celebrated them as if their love was pure, as if betrayal could ever be glamorous. The billionaire and his new flame. Love has no age when money speaks. The power couple of the year. Each headline was a blade, slicing deeper into the wounds he had left me with. At first, I tried to ignore it. I avoided the news, silenced my phone, and closed the curtains of my mansion. But the world has a way of forcing you to watch when it knows you are suffering. Invitations, 2 galas arrived in my mailbox, ones we once attended together. His name was always on the guest list, this time with hers beside his. Friends called me with fake concern, their voices dripping with curiosity more than care. Are you all right? Did you see the latest photos? I would hang up before they could finish, but I could not avoid it forever. One evening, I sat in my study, scrolling through an article. There he was, my husband of 25 years, in a tailored suit worth more than most people's homes. His arm was around her waist, the young woman who now held his hand in public as though she had earned it. She wore a glittering gown, diamonds that could only have come from him, and a smile that screamed victory. I zoomed in on her face. Smooth skin, wide eyes, lips painted in a perfect shade of red. She was younger, yes, but there was something in her eyes, greed, calculation, a hunger for more than love. I knew that look. I had seen it in boardrooms, in business partners, in anyone who thought they could climb higher by stepping on someone else. She was not with him for his heart. She was with him for his empire. That part of me wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to scream, but I did neither. Instead, I studied every image carefully, every article, every detail. Knowledge was power, and I was collecting it quietly. They began to flaunt themselves everywhere. Lavish vacations on private islands, luxury yachts on the French Riviera, penthouse suites overlooking skylines. She clung to his arm in every photograph, her laughter exaggerated, her poses rehearsed. He looked proud, as if parading her was his final triumph over me. The world applauded, but I saw through it. I noticed the way his eyes sometimes wandered, away from her, the stiffness in his smile when he thought no one was watching. He wanted to believe he was happy, but happiness built on betrayal is fragile. One night I attended a charity gala alone. I wore a sleek black gown and diamond necklace I had purchased for myself. I was determined to walk in with my head high, not as his discarded wife, but as a woman who still commanded presence. The room buzzed with whispers when I entered. Eyes turned, some filled with pity, others with curiosity. I ignored them all and moved gracefully through the crowd. But then, the moment I dreaded arrived. He walked in with her by his side. The cameras flashed instantly. He in his midnight blue tuxedo, she in a golden dress that shimmered under the chandeliers. They looked like royalty. She clung to him tightly, her smile wide, her gaze flicking around the room to make sure everyone was watching. Our eyes met across the hall. For a second, the noise, the music, the laughter, all of it disappeared. It was just him and me, staring at one another. His expression did not change, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt, regret, or was it just irritation that I refused to vanish quietly? I lifted my glass and smiled faintly, a silent message. I am still here. I am not destroyed. He looked away quickly, turning his attention back to her as she whispered something in his ear. The photographers clicked endlessly, capturing their laughter, their kisses, their staged affection. The world would see passion, but I saw performance. Throughout the evening, I noticed how she pulled him toward conversations with the wealthiest men, how she flaunted her jewelry to the wives of tycoons, how she ensured every eye was on her. She was playing her role perfectly, and he, blinded by his arrogance, believed it was love. I left the gala early, my pride intact. I did not need to stay and watch them bask in shallow glory. I had seen enough. Their life together was a spectacle, a show for the world. But shows eventually end. Days turned into weeks, and their story grew louder. They hosted extravagant parties, threw money at charities for attention, and made headlines with their whirlwind romance. People adored them, envied them, despised them. Meanwhile, I stayed in the shadows, quietly strengthening my own empire. Yet no matter how much I tried to focus on myself, the images of them haunted me. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night, his face burned into my mind, the sound of her laughter echoing in my ears. Anger and sorrow warred inside me until I could hardly breathe, but I reminded myself of one truth: appearances are deceiving. His life with her looked glorious, but underneath, cracks would begin to show. I knew him better than anyone. He was not a man who could ever be truly satisfied. He needed control, admiration, and endless praise. The moment she faltered, the moment she disappointed him, their glittering world would start to collapse, and when it did, I would be ready. One afternoon, while sipping tea in my garden, I received a call from an old acquaintance in the business world. His voice carried hesitation, as though he did not want to speak openly. "Have you heard?" he asked cautiously. "Heard what?" I replied, my tone calm, though my heart quickened. "There are rumors, deals slipping through his fingers, investors questioning his decisions. Some say she is influencing him too much." I thanked him and ended the call, a small smile curving my lips. So, the cracks had already begun. She was not simply a distraction. She was meddling where she did not belong. That was the danger of arrogance. She believed she could handle his empire, but she was playing a game she did not understand. As I set my cup down, I realized something important. I did not need to rush. I did not need to chase vengeance or prove myself too quickly. His downfall was inevitable. All I had to do was wait, watching patiently as the empire he had abandoned me for began to rot from within. For now, I let the world adore their illusion. Let them shine under the lights, pose for the cameras, and dance at their parties. The higher they climbed, the harder they would fall, and when they did, I would not be broken and forgotten. I would be the one standing strong, ready to show him what true power looked like. Asterisk. The glorious life he flaunted today was nothing but glass, fragile and ready to shatter. I was waiting for the sound of it breaking. Asterisk. The headlines did not shift overnight. For weeks, the world still celebrated them, plastering their smiles across every glossy cover. They looked unstoppable, untouchable, as if their love had been blessed by fortune itself. But fortune, I knew, was a fickle friend. The first whisper came quietly, tucked inside a financial journal that most people overlook. A single paragraph noted that one of his largest projects had been delayed due to unforeseen complications. The article moved on quickly, dismissing it as a minor inconvenience, but I read between the lines. My husband was never late, never unprepared. For something of his magnitude to be delayed, it meant there was turbulence beneath the surface. I clipped the article and tucked it away, marking it as the first crack in the flawless image he projected. Days later, another whisper arrived, this time from an old friend who still moved in the business world. He called under the pretense of catching up, but his tone was cautious, almost conspiratorial. "Have you heard?" he asked. I let the silence linger before answering. "Heard what?" "There is talk of investors pulling back. They say he is distracted, that she is too involved in decisions she does not understand." My pulse quickened, though my face remained calm. "Is that so? I thought you should know," he replied softly, as if he feared his words might find their way back to my husband. I thanked him politely and ended the call. The moment the line went dead, I sat back in my chair and let a slow smile spread across my lips. The empire he had built with such arrogance was no longer untouchable. The younger woman he paraded around as a trophy was now becoming his liability. I could almost see it playing out. She would whisper ideas into his ear, ideas born of greed rather than wisdom, and he would follow them to prove his love. Investors, once loyal, would begin to doubt him. Deals would fall through. Enemies, long silent, would take advantage of his distraction. The cracks were widening. I began to pay closer attention. I followed every article, every report, every whisper that floated through the business world. I hired a discreet investigator, someone loyal only to me, to track his movements and hers. What I discovered confirmed my suspicions. She was reckless, shopping sprees worth millions, gambling in exclusive clubs, hosting extravagant parties under his name. She flaunted her newfound wealth without understanding the delicate balance required to maintain it. She believed money was endless, that it would always flow like water, because she had never known the discipline it took to create it, and he, blinded by pride, allowed it. Perhaps he even encouraged it, desperate to prove to the world that he had traded me for a better life. I watched from the sidelines, patient, calculating. I was not driven by bitterness anymore. This was not just about heartbreak. It was about power. He had underestimated me, cast me aside as though I was nothing. But I was watching him crumble piece by piece, and I would be there when his fall was complete. But one evening, I attended another charity gala. I wore a crimson gown, bold and unashamed. I knew he would be there, and I wanted him to see that I was not hiding. When I entered the ballroom, the whispers followed me again, but I walked with my head held high. He arrived an hour later with her on his arm. This time, something was different. His tuxedo was flawless, her gown glittered, but his smile did not reach his eyes. I noticed the tension in his jaw, the slight stiffness in his posture. She, however, seemed more radiant than ever, laughing too loudly, clutching his arm as if staking her claim. Throughout the night, I observed them carefully. She pulled him into conversations with influential people, but I noticed how their eyes shifted uncomfortably when she spoke. She interrupted, bragged, and made careless remarks that revealed her ignorance. He tried to mask his irritation, but I saw it. Others did too. At one point, I passed by them near the champagne table. Our eyes met, and for the briefest moment, I saw it clearly in his gaze strain. He was no longer the man who had strutted so confidently into the spotlight with his younger woman. He was a man beginning to feel the weight of his choices. I offered him a polite smile, a silent dagger. He looked away quickly, pretending to listen to her laughter. Later that evening, as I stood near the balcony, a well-known business partner approached me. He hesitated, then leaned in close. "He is losing control," he whispered. "We do not say it openly, but everyone knows. Deals are failing, and she is part of the problem." I raised my glass slowly, my eyes fixed on the couple across the room. "Let him lose," I said calmly. thought the man chuckled nervously and excused himself, but I remained on the balcony, watching the spectacle unfold. By the end of the night, as they left in a flurry of flashing cameras, I realized something vital. His paradise was not just cracking, it was rotting from within. And once the rot set in, there would be no stopping the collapse. In the weeks that followed, the evidence became undeniable. One of his largest investors withdrew support, citing irreconcilable differences in vision. Another deal fell apart after negotiations dragged on without resolution. The press began to notice the patterns. Articles shifted tones subtly, praising less, questioning more, and then came the scandal. Photographs surfaced of her leaving a casino. In the early hours of the morning, her expression wild, her jewelry mismatched, her hands clutching chips she had not paid for. The tabloids erupted, speculating about her habits, her recklessness, her influence on him. He tried to contain it, issuing statements about her being misunderstood, but the damage was done. Investors do not trust a man who cannot control his household, and whispers of weakness spread like wildfire. I sat in my living room, reading every article, savoring every word. This was not schadenfreude. This was justice. He had humiliated me, broken me, discarded me. Now the world was beginning to see who he truly was, and I did not have to lift a finger. One evening, as I closed the latest report, my phone buzzed with a message from my investigator. It was a photograph. Him and her, seated in a restaurant, arguing. His face was red with anger, hers twisted with defiance. The caption beneath read simply, "The cracks are widening." I stared at the photo for a long time, then set the phone aside. It was happening faster than I expected. The glorious life he had chosen was collapsing around him, and soon, very soon, he would realize the cost of betraying me. But I was not ready to face him yet. Not yet. I wanted him to drown in the consequences of his arrogance first. I wanted him to taste the bitterness of loss, to feel the walls closing in, to understand what it meant to be powerless, because when the moment finally came, when he was brought to his knees, I would be waiting, not with forgiveness, not with pity, but with the truth. The empire he thought he built alone was crumbling, and I, the woman he had cast aside, was standing stronger than ever. His paradise was breaking, and this time, there would be no saving it, no saving it. The day I knew the tides had truly turned came quietly, without warning. I was sitting in the conservatory of my home, sunlight streaming through the tall glass windows, sipping tea in silence. The headlines had been slowly shifting for weeks, but that morning, one screamed louder than the rest. The billionaire and his bride, from golden couple to crumbling empire. I read every word carefully. The article outlined the mounting failures of his ventures, the investors who had walked away, and the whispers that his personal life was poisoning his business. They wrote of her reckless spending, her nights in casinos, her inability to fit into the circles of influence that had once bowed to him. What struck me most was the tone. There was no longer adoration. The media that once crowned him as untouchable was now circling like vultures, waiting for the fall. I set the paper down and leaned back in my chair, a slow satisfaction warming me from within. The cracks had widened into fissures, and now the world was beginning to see what I had always known. But beneath that satisfaction was something else, a quiet anticipation. Because when a man like him begins to lose control, desperation soon follows. And desperation makes people dangerous. The first sign of it came in the form of a phone call. My phone rang late in the evening, an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. I almost ignored it, but something compelled me to answer. Hello. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a voice I knew too well, deep, commanding, yet laced with something I had never heard in it before: hesitation. "It is me." My breath caught, though I did not let it show in my tone. "What do you want?" There was a pause, the faint sound of him exhaling. I thought we should talk." I laughed softly, without humor. "After everything, now you want to talk." His voice tightened. "It is not like that." "Oh, it is exactly like that," I replied, my words sharp. "You left me for a younger woman and paraded your betrayal for the world to see. You made sure I knew I was nothing to you, and now you call me. Why?" He did not answer immediately. For the first time in all the years I had known him, I heard uncertainty in his silence. "I just thought," he began slowly, "that we could catch up." I felt a bitter smile curve my lips. Catch up, as if we were old friends who had drifted apart, not a husband and wife torn apart by betrayal. "No," I said firmly, and hung up. I sat there for a long time after, the phone still in my hand, my heart racing. That call was not about catching up. It was the beginning of his desperation. He would not have reached out unless something was unraveling faster than he could control. And I was right. Within days, more reports surfaced. Another failed deal, another investor walking away. Then came the lawsuit, a former partner suing him for breach of contract. The story dominated headlines, painting him not as a powerful billionaire, but as a man whose empire was crumbling around him. I watched it all unfold with a strange calmness. The man who once stood so high above me was sinking, and every headline was another stone pulling him down. But the true breaking point came at yet another gala. I had been invited, as always, and I chose to attend. I wore a sapphire gown that shimmered beneath the lights, diamonds that caught every camera flash. If I was to be seen, I would be seen as untouchable. When he entered with her, the energy in the room shifted. There was no awe this time, no collective gasp at their arrival. Instead, there were whispers. People turned their heads, not with admiration, but with curiosity, even pity. I studied him carefully. His smile was forced, his posture rigid. She, however, seemed oblivious, laughing too loudly, clinging to him, as if nothing had changed. But I saw it, the tension in his shoulders, the flicker of panic in his eyes when conversations grew cold. Throughout the evening, I noticed the distance growing between them. He no longer looked at her with pride. Instead, he seemed weighed down by her presence, irritated by her need for attention. At one point, she stormed away from him after a brief exchange, her face twisted in anger. He stood alone for several moments, surrounded by people but completely isolated. I made sure to cross his path before the night was over. When our eyes met, I held his gaze, calm and unwavering. For a moment, it was as if the world around us disappeared. I saw it clearly, this time desperation, raw and unmasked. Enjoying the evening, I asked smoothly. His jaw tightened. "You look well, better than you," I replied, my voice steady. He flinched almost imperceptibly, then looked away. I did not linger. I walked past him, leaving him standing there, the image of a man unraveling. Later that night, my investigator sent me another message. Photographs of him and her leaving the gala separately, her face furious, his expression grim. The cracks were now CHASMS. In the weeks that followed, the calls began. First one, then another. Always from unfamiliar numbers, always his voice on the other end. Sometimes he tried to sound casual, other times urgent. "I just want to talk. You do not understand what I am going through. Please, we need to meet." I ignored most of them. When I did answer, my replies were cold, measured. He was not calling me out of love. He was calling because he was losing everything, and somewhere, deep down, he knew I was the one who had always been his anchor. The younger woman, once his pride, was now his curse. Rumors swirled of her affairs, her reckless behavior, her threats to leave if he did not meet her demands. He was trapped, his empire bleeding money, his image tarnished, his new life poisoning him from within. And through it all, he reached for me, the woman he had discarded, the woman he believed he no longer needed. But I was not the same woman he left behind. Each time I heard his voice, each time I saw his face in the papers, I reminded myself of one truth. Desperation does not erase betrayal. He was falling, yes, but that did not mean I was there to catch him. One evening, after his fourth missed call in a single night, I stood in front of my mirror, studying my reflection. I saw strength in my eyes, resilience in the lines of my face. I had survived his betrayal. I had rebuilt my life, not from his scraps, but from my own power. If he thought he could return to me, begging for salvation, he was mistaken. But I would not silence him completely. I would let him call, let him beg, let him crawl toward me. Because the more desperate he became, the more the world would see the truth that the man who once thought he could throw me away was now nothing without me. His empire was collapsing, his marriage was fracturing, his pride was crumbling. And soon, very soon, he would be on his knees, not out of love, not out of regret, but out of pure, unshakable desperation. And when that moment came, I would decide his fate. The sixth call came not at night, not from an unfamiliar number, but in broad daylight. My phone rang, and when I looked down, the name flashing on the screen stopped me cold. It was his number, his real number. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. He had been hiding behind anonymous calls and blocked IDs for weeks. The fact that he was using his own phone now told me one thing: he no longer cared who knew he was reaching out to me. I let it ring until the final moment, then answered. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone flat. His voice cracked in a way I had never heard before. "Please, can we meet?" I closed my eyes briefly, savoring the power in those words. The man who once stood in front of me, declaring he no longer needed me, was now reduced to begging for a moment of my time. "Why?" I asked sharply. "Because everything is falling apart," he said quickly, desperation pouring through the line. "You do not understand. I cannot trust anyone anymore. They are all against me. I just need to talk to you." I let the silence stretch, making him feel the weight of my hesitation. "You made your choice," I said finally. "You chose her. You chose to throw me away. Why should I listen to you now?" "Because," he whispered, voice shaking, "I was wrong." Those words hung in the air, heavy and trembling. I could have hung up right then, could have left him dangling in his misery. But something inside me, a mixture of curiosity and vindication, wanted to see him face to face, not to comfort him, not to forgive him, but to watch him fall with my own eyes. "Tomorrow," I said coldly. "The cafe on Rosewood Avenue. 2 o'clock. Do not be late." When I ended the call, my hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the surge of power coursing through me. For months, I had endured humiliation. For months, I had been forced to watch him bask in glory while I stood in the shadows. But now, the balance had shifted. The next day, I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early. It was quiet, tucked away, the kind of place where few would expect a man like him to appear. I chose a table by the window, ordered tea, and waited. At exactly 2 o'clock, he walked in. For a moment, I almost did not recognize him. His suit was impeccable, as always, but it hung differently on him now, as if he had lost weight. His posture was slightly stooped, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. The proud, untouchable billionaire was gone. In his place stood a man unraveling. When he saw me, he froze. I watched the emotions flicker across his face: relief, shame, longing. Slowly, he crossed the cafe and sat across from me. "You look," he stopped himself, searching for words. "You look strong." "I am," I replied firmly. "Now tell me why you are here." He clasped his hands together, something he never used to do. His confidence had always been his shield, but now that shield was shattered. "Everything is collapsing," he admitted. "The businesses, the deals, the investors, they are all turning against me. And her," his voice broke. "She does not understand. She only takes and takes. She spends money as if it grows from the ground. She mocks me when I try to stop her. I thought she would make me happy, but she is destroying me." I studied him quietly, every word sinking into me like a balm to wounds I thought had scarred over. He had humiliated me, broken me, discarded me, and now here he was, confessing his ruin. "And what," I asked softly, "do you expect me to do about it?" His eyes met mine, raw and pleading. "I need you. You were always the one who kept everything together, the one who balanced me, who grounded me. Without you, I am." His voice faltered, and he looked down. "I am lost." For a long moment, I simply stared at him, letting his words hang in the air. He had once told me I was holding him back, that he no longer needed me, and now he was admitting the opposite. "You left me," I said coldly. "You humiliated me in front of the world. You took everything we built together and handed it to someone else. And now you come crawling back." He flinched as if struck. "I was blind," he whispered. "I thought I needed something new, something exciting. I did not realize what I already had. Please, I am begging you, help me." I leaned forward slightly, my eyes piercing into his. "What is it you want from me? Be specific." He hesitated, then finally spoke the words I had known were coming. "Your fortune," he admitted hoarsely. "I need your support, your resources. If I can stabilize things, I can rebuild. But I cannot do it alone." There it was, the plea, the admission that the man who had cast me aside now needed the very thing he once thought I had no claim to. I sat back, folding my arms. "So that is it, you want my money?" "It is not just that," he said quickly, panic flashing in his eyes. "It is you. I need you. You were always the foundation. Please, do not let me fall." I let a long silence settle between us, watching him squirm. Finally, I spoke, my voice sharp as glass. You should have thought of that before you left me. His face crumpled, desperation etching every line. Please, he whispered, voice breaking. I am begging you. I stood slowly, gathering my bag. You wanted freedom. You wanted her. Now you have both. Live with it. As I walked away, I could feel the eyes of the cafe patrons following me. I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew what I would see him, sitting there, broken, powerless, begging. When I stepped outside into the sunlight, a surge of strength filled me. He had once made me feel small, discarded, worthless. But now the roles were reversed. Now he was the one left behind, pleading for scraps, while I walked away whole. That evening, my investigator sent me another photograph. Him, standing outside the cafe long after I had gone, his head in his hands, his suit rumpled, his posture defeated. The caption read, "The begging has begun." I saved the photograph, slipping it into the folder where I had kept every article, every report, every piece of evidence of his downfall. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. Because I knew he would not stop with one plea. He would keep coming, keep begging, keep lowering himself further. And when he was at his lowest, when he was stripped of every ounce of pride, I would deliver the final blow. The man who once thought he could live without me would learn the ultimate truth. He could not survive without me, and by the time he realized it, it would be far too late. The call at the cafe was only the beginning. He thought a plea for redemption might be enough, that a few words of regret and desperation would sway me back into his orbit. But he underestimated the strength I had gained in his absence. He underestimated the resolve of a woman who had been broken, discarded, humiliated, and had risen stronger than ever. And now the cracks in his empire had widened into a full collapse. The headlines arrived like a storm, one after another. Investors withdraw millions. Share prices plummet overnight. New wife's scandalous behavior costs him key deals. His name, once synonymous with power, wealth, and control, was now a punchline. I watched from the safety of my home, each article another victory. Yet I also knew this was only the surface. The world saw a billionaire losing his grip. I saw a man circling the drain, clawing at anything to keep from drowning, and sooner or later, he would reach for me again. He did, this time, not with a call, but with a visit. I was in the garden when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. My heart stilled. Only a handful of people knew the code to open the gates, and I had not given him permission. I rose slowly, setting aside the pruning shears, and turned toward the sound of approaching footsteps. And there he was, for the first time in years. He looked nothing like the man I had married. His tailored suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, his hair unkempt. His face was drawn, eyes shadowed with exhaustion and panic. The aura of invincibility he had once carried like armor was gone. "You should not be here," I said firmly, my voice carrying across the garden. He stopped a few paces away, chest heaving as if he had been running. "Please," he gasped. "I had no choice. They are taking everything." I stood tall, calm, collected, while he trembled like a man facing execution. "What did you expect?" I asked coldly. "You built your empire on arrogance and betrayal. And now it is crumbling. I need your help," he pleaded, stepping closer. "They are freezing my accounts. The lawsuits are piling up. She is gone. She packed her bags and left last night with more than half of what I gave her. I have nothing." I raised an eyebrow, my lips curving in the faintest smile. "Nothing. You still have your pride, though even that looks battered." He shook his head violently. "No, pride cannot save me now. Please, you are the only one who can." The satisfaction was intoxicating, yet I did not let it cloud my judgment. He was desperate, yes, but desperation can drive a man to dangerous extremes. "Leave my property," I commanded. Now, his shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I thought he might collapse entirely. But instead, he dropped to his knees right there in the gravel. "Please," he begged, his voice raw, "do not let them destroy me. You know me better than anyone. You know what I am capable of. But without you, I am finished." The sight should have broken me once, should have stirred compassion, but instead, I felt only clarity. This was the same man who had once looked me in the eye and declared I was nothing without him. And now, he was kneeling before me, powerless, stripped of everything he thought made him invincible. I turned away, unwilling to let him see the flicker of triumph in my eyes. "Get up," I said sharply. You chose this path, live with it. But he did not move. He stayed on his knees, gravel digging into his trousers, pride bleeding out of him with every second. Do not walk away, he whispered hoarsely. Please, I will do anything. I paused, my back still to him. Anything. Yes, he breathed. Anything. For a moment, I considered it. To have him at my mercy, willing to crawl, willing to bend, willing to break. The possibilities swirled in my mind. But I was not ready to grant him absolution, not ready to end this game. You will regret everything you did to me, I said, finally. And you will regret it for the rest of your life. I walked back into the house, leaving him kneeling in the driveway. When I closed the door, I did not look back. The sound of silence followed me, and I knew he remained there for a long time, waiting for a mercy that would never come. Later that evening, my investigator sent me photographs once again. Him, sitting in a hotel bar, glass after glass of whiskey lined in front of him, his tie discarded, his face buried in his hands. The caption was simple: collapse complete. But I knew it was not complete, not yet, because collapse is not just financial. It is not just public humiliation. True collapse is when a man's spirit is broken beyond repair. And he was not there yet. He was close, teetering on the edge, but not quite destroyed. That night, I stood at my window, watching the moonlight spill across the garden. I thought of the woman he had left me for, the woman who had drained him dry and abandoned him. I thought of the empire he had built with arrogance, now reduced to ash. And I thought of the man himself, once so certain he could discard me and thrive, now begging for my mercy. I realized something then. This was no longer about revenge. This was about reclaiming power, about proving to myself and to the world that I had never been the weak one in our story. He had mistaken my silence for submission, my love for weakness, and now he was learning the truth. The next morning, he called again. His voice was hoarse, slurred, thick with exhaustion. Please, he murmured, almost incoherent. I need you. I said nothing for a long moment. Then, with a steady hand, I ended the call. This was his world collapsing, and I was not going to stop it. Because sometimes, justice does not come in the form of grand gestures. Sometimes, it comes in silence, in the refusal to save the man who once believed you were nothing. And as he spiraled deeper into ruin, I knew this was only the beginning of the true end. The collapse had begun as whispers, then headlines, then photographs of him unraveling. But what came next was the breaking point, the moment when his empire, his pride, and the last remnants of his mask shattered in one final, undeniable fall. I should have expected it. But when the call came from my investigator early that morning, the details still jolted me. He was escorted out of a board meeting yesterday, the investigator reported, in front of his entire executive team. Security had to intervene. Investors are demanding his resignation, effective immediately. They are cutting him out. For years, he had been the face of control, the man who walked into a room and commanded it with silence alone. Now he had been dragged out, powerless, humiliated. The image stayed with me all morning. I pictured him being escorted through glass doors, while whispers rippled through the office he once ruled. I pictured the smirks of those who had waited years for his downfall, the disappointment of those who had once worshipped him, and the cameras flashing as he stumbled onto the street with nothing left but his broken pride by afternoon. The headlines confirmed it. Billionaire CEO forced out amid scandal. Fortune crumbles after wife's lavish spending spree. From empire to ashes. The fall of a titan. His name was no longer gilded. It was tarnished, mocked, and dissected for the world to feast on. And then, as I had known it would, he came to me again. The knock on my door was loud, frantic, a hammering that echoed through the house. I did not rush. I walked slowly, deliberately, letting each step remind me of how far the balance of power had shifted. When I opened the door, he stood there, unshaven, disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, tie loose, eyes bloodshot. They took everything, he rasped, everything. My name, my company, my reputation. It is gone. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. And you are surprised. His jaw tightened. You do not understand. They are turning me into a spectacle. I am the story. Now, they follow me everywhere. I cannot step outside without cameras flashing in my face, without someone shouting questions. And she, his voice cracked, she is filing lawsuits. She wants half of what little I have left. She is painting me as the villain, while she drains the last drop from my veins. I studied him for a long moment, letting him squirm under my gaze. He had once stood tall before me, declaring that I was holding him back, that I was nothing. Now he looked like a man dragged through the dirt, stripped bare. "And what?" I asked coldly. "Do you want from me now?" His shoulders slumped, his voice breaking. "I want you to save me." The words hung in the air, fragile and desperate. "Save you," I repeated, my tone sharp. "From what?" "From yourself." He swallowed hard, his eyes wet. "From ruin. From this humiliation. You are the only one who can. You still have influence, resources, connections. People respect you. They always did. You could help me rebuild." I almost laughed. He had destroyed me in public, stripped me of dignity, left me to rot in shadows. And now, with his empire in flames, he wanted me to step forward as his savior. "Think I will spend my fortune on you?" I asked, voice icy. "After everything?" He stepped closer, his hands trembling. "I am begging you, please. I have nothing left. You do not understand how far I have fallen." I held his gaze, unflinching. "No, I understand perfectly. I have been there. I know exactly what it feels like to be discarded, humiliated, left with nothing. The difference is, I rebuilt myself. I rose from it. You cannot." His face contorted, torn between rage and despair. "You want to see me destroyed," he whispered bitterly. "Yes," I said softly. "I do." For a moment, silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then his knees buckled, and he sank to the floor of my doorway. "Please," he choked out. "Do not leave me like this. I cannot survive it." The sight of him crumbling should have sparked pity. Instead, it filled me with clarity. This was the man who had mocked me, discarded me, called me nothing. And now he was nothing. I stepped back, my hand tightening on the door. "You made your choices. Now live with them." I closed the door slowly, leaving him kneeling in the shadows outside. His muffled sobs seeped through the wood, but I did not open it again. That night, the headlines grew even darker. Photographs of him wild-eyed stumbling from bars, security escorting him through airports, angry investors shouting in his face. His world was no longer collapsing quietly. It was shattering publicly. Each moment captured, each humiliation broadcast. The investigator's final message of the day was chilling. He tried to check into a hotel tonight. They refused him. Too much debt, too much scandal. He is running out of places to go. I read the words twice, my heart steady, my mind clear. This was the breaking point. The man who once believed he was untouchable had been dragged down to the ground, stripped of power, respect, and pride. He had begged, he had pleaded, he had wept. And still, there was nothing left for him but ruin. As I stood at the window, the city lights flickering in the distance, I realized something with sharp certainty. This was not just about revenge anymore. This was about justice, and justice, I knew, had not yet delivered its final blow. The fall of a man like him was never going to be quiet. It was always destined to be a spectacle, a storm of flashing cameras, jeering headlines, and whispers that spread like wildfire. By the time the 9th month of his decline arrived, there was no corner of the city where his name did not echo in disgrace. He had lost his company. He had lost his fortune. He had lost his mistress, his so-called younger prize. And, worst of all, he had lost the mask of untouchable power that had shielded him for years. Now he was nothing more than a man stripped bare before the world. The first blow came with the court summons. Fraud, mismanagement, breach of fiduciary duty. His empire had been built on arrogance and reckless spending, and now the very foundations of his wealth were being ripped apart in a courtroom for all to see. He walked through the courthouse steps surrounded by reporters, their microphones stabbing toward him, their questions slicing like knives. Did you really drain company funds to finance her lifestyle? Do you regret leaving your wife? Is it true you are bankrupt? The cameras did not miss a single twitch of his face, a single crack in his voice. Once, he would have stood tall, chin high, answering with the calculated confidence of a billionaire untouchable by scandal. Now he hunched his shoulders, shielded his face, and stumbled through the crowd as though the ground itself might swallow him whole. I watched the footage from home, the court steps replayed again and again on every channel. I studied the lines on his face, the hollowness in his eyes, the way the swagger had been stripped from his walk. This was not the man who had left me with arrogance and cruelty. This was a man drowning before the world, gasping for dignity that no one was willing to offer him. But the true humiliation was still to come. The gala had been his crown jewel once, the annual charity ball where he had stood at the center of glittering chandeliers, where business tycoons and politicians had vied for his attention, where his presence had defined the very height of wealth and prestige. This year, the gala went on without him. He was not invited, not welcomed, not even acknowledged. Instead, he showed up unannounced, staggering in through the grand doors as though he still belonged. The photographs hit the internet within minutes. Him, in a suit that no longer fit properly, hair unkempt, eyes glazed with desperation, security trailing close behind him, unsure of whether to drag him out or let him humiliate himself further, guests turning their faces away, some whispering behind their champagne glasses, others openly laughing. He made his way to the center of the ballroom, stumbling slightly on the polished floor, and tried to raise his glass for a toast that no one had asked him to give. His voice cracked, his words slurred, his plea echoing across the marble hall. "I built this city's wealth," he cried. "I deserve your respect. I deserve your help." But no one stepped forward. No one raised a glass in return. Instead, the laughter grew. Cameras flashed like lightning. And then, finally, security stepped in. 2 men in black suits gripping his arms, dragging him back toward the doors as his glass shattered on the floor. The headline the next morning was merciless. From billionaire to beggar, former tycoon, ejected from charity gala. The footage was worse. His humiliation played on a loop across every screen, every platform. His desperate voice, his stumbling steps, his pleas falling on deaf ears. The man who had once controlled rooms with silence now reduced to background noise in a scandal reel. I sat at my desk, watching the video again, each replay peeling away the last layers of pity that might have lingered. He had asked me once to save him. He had begged me to pull him from ruin. And now the world had delivered the final blow, stripping him of the last shred of power he clung to. Later that week, I found him waiting outside my gate again, but this time, there was no suit, no attempt at dignity. He was in torn clothes, unshaven, his eyes wild with sleeplessness. He looked more like a vagrant than the man I had once known. "Please," he whispered as I approached. "They have taken everything. I have nowhere to go." I stared at him for a long moment, my hands steady at my sides. "And you expect me to open my door?" His voice cracked. "You are my last hope." The bitterness in me rose like a tide, sharp and undeniable. "You called me nothing. You left me for someone younger, richer in your eyes, someone you thought would elevate you. You thought I was weak, a burden, a shadow in your story. And now you stand before me with nothing, asking for mercy." Tears welled in his eyes, but they did not move me. "I am begging you," he said again, his voice breaking completely. "Please, I will do anything." I leaned forward slightly, my words deliberate, my tone sharp enough to cut. "You will do nothing. You will walk away. Because mercy is not yours to ask for anymore. You forfeited that the day you walked out of this door." For a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy and final. Then he staggered back, his face crumpling as the reality sank in. He had lost not just his empire, not just his fortune, not just his pride. He had lost me. As the gate closed behind me, shutting him out for good, I felt no sorrow, only clarity. This was the end of him, and it was the beginning of me. Because the greatest humiliation was not that the world had turned its back on him, it was that the one woman he had underestimated the most had risen while he fell. And the final chapter of his ruin was written not by his enemies, not by the tabloids, not by the younger woman who had betrayed him. It was written by me. Silence, through strength, through the refusal to ever let him step into my world again. The morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that stretched across the city like a heavy blanket. I stood by the window, coffee warming my hand, and watched the sunlight spill over the skyline. A year ago, mornings had been battles waking up to whispers of betrayal. 2 empty spaces in a bed once shared, to a silence that felt like defeat. But now, mornings belonged to me again. The headlines confirmed what I already knew. His name was no longer associated with wealth, innovation, or power. It was shorthand for disgrace. Journalists no longer called him a mogul. They called him a cautionary tale. His empire was dismantled, his fortunes scattered, his so-called allies vanished into the shadows. And yet, even as the world forgot him, he could not stop coming back to me. The knock came just past noon, this time softer, weaker, almost hesitant. When I opened the door, the man who had once left me for a younger woman stood before me like a ghost of himself, his shoulders slumped, his clothes threadbare, his face marked with exhaustion and regret. He did not speak right away. He just looked at me, as though trying to summon words from the ruins of his pride. Finally, he whispered, "I have nothing left." I studied him carefully, noting the hollowness of his cheeks, the tremble in his hands. He was not lying. The last of his pride was gone. "You wanted this life," I reminded him, my voice calm. "Even you chose it when you walked out of this house. You told me I was nothing. You told me she was your future. And now," he closed his eyes, shame painting his face. "Now I see that I was wrong." I let the silence hang for a moment before I asked, "What do you want from me this time?" His voice cracked. "Forgiveness, shelter, a chance to survive." A bitter laugh rose in my chest, but I held it back. Instead, I stepped closer, my eyes locked on his. "You had everything. A wife who loved you, a home, loyalty, stability. You traded it for vanity, for youth, for the illusion of power. You thought I would crumble, but I did not." I rose. "And now you ask me to give you what you denied me." His hands shook. "I am begging you." I drew in a steady breath. This was the moment. Not of revenge, not of cruelty, but of finality. "You will not get my forgiveness," I said firmly. "You will not get my fortune. You will not get shelter under my roof. What you will get is the life you built for yourself. You will live in the ruins of your choices." Tears welled in his eyes, spilling down his cheeks. But I did not move to comfort him. My compassion had limits, and he had crossed them long ago. "I could save you," I admitted, my tone sharp as glass. "But why should I? You never saved me. When I was on the floor, broken, you stepped over me without a glance. You left me in the dark so you could shine in someone else's light. You want redemption now, but redemption must be earned, and you have done nothing but destroy." His breath came in ragged gasps, his hands gripping the edge of the doorway, like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. "You hate me," he whispered. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I do not hate you. Hate would mean you still mattered. You do not. What I feel for you is nothing." The words struck him harder than any slap could. His face crumpled, his knees buckled, and he sank to the ground at my feet. "Please," he begged one last time, his voice raw, stripped of everything. "Do not leave me with nothing." I looked down at him, the man who had once towered over me with arrogance, the man who had believed himself untouchable, now reduced to rubble. "You gave me nothing," I said quietly. "And now nothing is all you have." I stepped back, closed the door, and let the final barrier fall between us. Inside, the silence was not heavy anymore. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that marked the end of a storm and the beginning of calm seas. I walked to my desk, where papers waited, plans for expansions, for investments, for projects that carried my name, not his. My empire was not built on betrayal or arrogance. It was built on resilience, on patience, on the fire that had burned brighter when he tried to snuff it out. Later that week, the news reported his last desperate act. He had sold the remnants of his possessions, drifted out of the city, and disappeared into obscurity. No one knew where he went, and no one cared. The world had moved on without him, and I stood taller than ever. At the next gala, I walked into the same ballroom where he had once humiliated himself. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, the crowd parted, and this time, the cameras turned toward me, not because of scandal, not because of pity, but because I had risen. I raised my glass, steady and proud, and spoke words that carried through the hall, to strength, to survival, to never letting anyone decide your worth. The applause thundered, not for him, but for me, because in the end, the fortune he begged for was never mine to give him. The true fortune was the strength I had claimed, the empire I had built, the dignity I had preserved, and that was something he could never touch.